Depending on your area of gaming interest, some pretty big news just dropped. ArcheAge and ArcheAge Unchained have announced that come December, they will again have a new publisher, this time Kakao Games. Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome. My name is CodeYo. I make survival, crafting, MMO content. If you like what you see or hear, please do consider dropping a like, maybe a sub, maybe some sweet whisper down below. Let's get into it. Now, I said again because this game was originally published in the West by Trion Games, the developers and publishers for games like Rift Online and Trove. Almost exactly 2 years ago, Trion was bought out by Gamigo Games, a company known for buying up dying MMOs, flooding them with microtransactions, milking the player base for everything that they have, and then shutting the game down. And that's sort of what happened. ArcheAge Unchained was announced while the acquisition was going on. It was to be a buy-to-play version of ArcheAge with no monthly fees, no pay to win, and it was heavily emphasized how your one-time purchase would give you access to everything forever. All expansions, all content, everything. And that's not what happened. Unchained released and it was a complete mess. The lead community managers who we were constantly seeing on Twitch, who were communicating very actively with the community, seemingly disappeared from the face of the planet the second that the game launched. They no longer showed up on streams. They seem to have just sort of relayed this responsibility to people who appeared to be below them in the chain, and it was kind of tragic to see how they tried to scrape everything together. This completely left the community feeling like we had no place to voice our opinions or our thoughts on the games, including any of the issues we were facing. We sort of felt completely swindled, especially with the inclusion of pay-to-win elements, which, as I had mentioned, we were promised wouldn't happen. This mostly came in the form of the Season Pass, which was quickly introduced after launch, which gave players massive incentive for purchasing them and grinding them out. It was actually extremely inefficient to even play the game unless you had this pass, because you would be so behind everybody else in progression. On top of that, future expansions were announced, and you can probably guess it, they had a price tag. ArcheAge Unchained was, in my opinion, an absolute mess of a launch. And even if you could look away from the Gamigo acquisition and the blatant lies that we were told leading up to launch, the game itself was still a mess. Oh god, here comes my ArcheAge rant. So the whole idea of ArcheAge was for it to be a sandbox style game. Do what you want, play what you want. It still has what I believe to be by far the best crafting system and housing system of any game ever. The housing one is a bit of a hot debate topic, but I have never felt the same connection to my housing as I have in ArcheAge. The way it works is it wasn't instanced housing that you're used to seeing. You actually owned plots of land in the open world. Being able to own an actual piece of the world and set up a farm with animals or crops or crafting stations and then decorate them to your pleasing with custom furnitures or imported images for paintings was amazing. Being able to walk through a residential area and see all those unique houses that you could walk through and explore without a loading screen. I'm looking at you, literally every other MMO with housing. It was amazing. It really made it feel like you were exploring a neighborhood set in a fantasy world, and it took the immersion to another level. Being able to hop over a hill and jump into your glider and then soar across all these neighborhoods and see all these unique housing areas was just a feeling that has never been matched in another game that I've played. Also, I had a portrait in my house where I had photoshopped my face onto a dragon, and I miss that. The idea was that if you weren't into fighting, whether PvE or PvP, that was totally okay. You could reach max level entirely by crafting or farming and make good money and have an impact, because crafters were an essential part of guilds. Crafted gear was great and sought after. All forms of crafting were tied into a resource called labor, which was a passive form of currency that recharged over time and was required to do anything trade skill related. Now, the beautiful thing here was that if you liked to do trade skills but also liked to fight, you could do both. Log in, chop your trees down, milk your cows, craft a few things, and then go run trade packs or run dungeons with your friends while your labor recharged, or just PvP. And that was completely gutted with the release of Unchained. There are people who would disagree with this. I don't care. I don't like them. They're wrong. Right at launch, the best gear was a set that you had to grind to level up and spend labor on to have a chance of enhancing it. You would grind dailies for 4 to 7 hours to get enough currency to try to level up your gear by blowing all of your labor points into it, leaving you with 0 labor to actually do any of the trade skill stuff. It was economically inefficient to have a house or a farm because the labor was infinitely better spent trying to progress your gear so you could be somewhat relevant in PvP or PvE. The gear was just so much stronger than anything else that could be crafted or looted. There was literally no reason to craft. It completely gutted the sandbox feeling of ArcheAge. You were now on a regiment every single day to play exactly how the game wanted you to play, and that's completely opposite of the vision of the game. And the worst part is that that gear wasn't even brand new to Unchained. It was actually introduced some years into ArcheAge as a way for new players to quickly grind up to a higher tier of gear to be somewhat on the same playing field as older users. Now that idea by itself wasn't bad, it somewhat made sense, but it should have never been in the game for the release of Unchained. I think that this one decision alone is what killed this game more so than anything else. It completely killed the game. No longer were various forms of progression anywhere close to being balanced. There was no point in playing the game unless you were doing this, and doing this just wasn't fun. Gamigo did nothing to improve this game, and stayed true to their usual course of lying to and milking their community. Now back to Kakao Games. They will be the new publishers of both ArcheAge and ArcheAge Unchained come December. You're probably most familiar with Kakao Games for being the former Black Desert Online publisher. Former because sole rights for the game currently have been released to the developers, Pearl Abyss. Kakao Games does have their hands currently in a handful of other titles, such as the Korean Path of Exile, the Western release of Ascent Infinite Realms, the recently released Elyon Online, and a spree of popular and successful mobile games. And all of this means that they know how to run a cash shop. I myself have never been too into BDO, but I have heard people saying that they were excited for the drop of Kakao Games since they were hopeful that it would lead to less pay to win in the game. Some have said since that they have seen less pay to win than with the other regions, but I'll have to keep that a speculation since I myself haven't been able to get in, or actually even wanted to get in, and check it out. So going forward, what does this mean? We can mostly only speculate what will happen moving forward in terms of the games and their cash shops. But for me, this trade-off of publishers confirms two things. Number one, Gamigo is a publisher that you should avoid. Unchained was heralded as their attempt to do right by their audience and prove that they could be a company worth following and investing in, and they completely used that trust to blindside their community and get as much money from them as they could. And yes, I'm still very salty about it. Number two, ArcheAge is going to be around for a while. Gamigo has a bad habit of buying games and doing nothing to its core. No new content, no new bug fixes, nothing for the actual game seemingly. They just throw in cash grabs. Now, Kakao, on the other hand, does both. They want your money, and they're not going to hide it, but they also want their game to succeed and carry on. This means most likely new content for ArcheAge with a more sustainable model. Of course, throw into the mix, ArcheAge 2 was announced some years ago. Kakao is believed to also be publishing this title in the West, but we'll have to see how that progresses. This potentially could be them securing the Western market for the ArcheAge IP, so they can transition into publishing the sequel in these markets in the future. Currently, there's very little information about ArcheAge 2, except a speculative release of late 2022. But seeing as we have no footage of the game, no screenshots, no concepts, I'd be very surprised if we even see this game before 2024, and that's being generous. What do you guys think of this news? Also, what do you think of this style of video? I've never made a news video before, and I always have kind of wanted to. So let me know what you guys think. I'd really appreciate it. If you did like what you saw or heard, please do consider slapping a subscription. I think you know what I mean. Do all the goodies, it helps. Algorithm, things, all of that. That is all for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, peace.